Welcome to the Mobile Widgets session. In this session, the number of topics that we'd like to discuss include answering the question of what is a widget, talk about the toolbox, which holds all of the widgets and patterns, and then look at two different sets of widgets. There are some basic widgets and then what we might refer to as the input widgets. So we'd like to discuss each of those and look at some examples of how those work. So what is a widget? Well, a widget is a simple built-in pattern that represents some basic screen component, and all of the widgets can be found in the toolbox. So what can the widgets do? Well, a lot of the basic widgets do things like lists, navigation, displaying content, or creating pop-ups. And then there's another set of widgets that are more input related, and these are form and individual inputs. So why do we have widgets at all? Well, the widgets are common components and they are highly reusable. So these are sort of the building blocks that help us build our user interfaces. And when we did an analysis of all of the applications that are out there in the world that are very popular, there were a number of built-in widgets and composite patterns that kept popping up. So it was important to go ahead and have those available if we wanted to be able to be very productive and create sites very quickly. So to be able to do that, we've created a number of widgets and we've placed all of those widgets on the left hand side of the editor area, and we refer to that area as the toolbox. Now the toolbox area is searchable, so you can find any of the widgets or Silk UI patterns that you might be looking for. But in general, there is a divider, and the divider allows us to kind of see that there's an area for widgets at the top and an area for patterns at the bottom. So that sort of gives us a divider, and if you hover on top of any of the widgets or patterns, it will tell you what they are. So it's very easy to kind of get an idea of what you're looking for. And then to be able to use the widgets, well, we would just drag and drop it. And if we drag and drop it from the toolbox onto the canvas, or in this case the sort of representation of the device in the canvas, then as we drag and drop things, we'll be able to begin seeing blue guide bars that show us where we can drop that particular item. Sometimes our user interface that is trying to display how things will look makes it very difficult to see exactly where that widget is going to be placed. So as we're doing that, the right hand tree area switches into the widgets area. And here you can see that we would know that we're no longer trying to drop this block in the header, because now you can see the blue line showing that it's going to be in the content area and it's going to appear just above the list. So as you begin dragging and dropping, you will see the widget area activate, and you can begin trying to place things here and see where it's going to go by looking at the widget tree on the right hand side. Now another way to kind of try to select a particular area to place it in is to think about where it's going to go ahead of time, and then you can begin looking at the widget hierarchy at the bottom, and you may want to select these to highlight something before you pick something out of the toolbox, and then you'll know exactly where the divider is about where to place it, because choosing something from the widget hierarchy will highlight it and make it easier to kind of see. So we now know where the widgets are. They're in the toolbox. What are some of the widgets that we might work with? Well, the very basic widgets are simply a container, which you can think of as a div, an expression that is almost like a variable. So when we put an expression in, anything that we can get out of the expression editor would be able to be available in an expression. We have a list that's going to be able to create a scrollable list of records, and inside that list there will be a list item. Another widget that we would have is an if, so that we can decide to display one thing or the other depending on the type of condition that might exist. We also may want to have a link that will link us to some sort of destination, and Sometimes we want those links to kind of just be text-based, but sometimes we want those links to be a little more interesting. So maybe we'll put an icon or an image and relate them to the icon or the image. We also have the capability of adding custom HTML at any point inside of a screen and then creating our own blocks. So we have talked about themes and things like that having blocks. We can create our own custom block to be able to do that. There's also a button group widget, which shows a number of buttons that allows only one to be selected at any given time. We also have a popover menu that gives us a number of different sort of menu options, including just a pop-up window, and then a special control that allows us to go ahead and upload files to the server whenever we need to. So those are some of the basic types of widgets. So there were probably 12 to 15 widgets. How many of those widgets do you think we might need to actually be able to build a simple to-do screen like this? Well, let's begin looking at some of the things that are here. We probably can see that this is a button bar across the top. We have some sort of list. We have some icons. So let's try to break down the screen to see what might be available here. Well, by default, we can put in containers pretty much wherever we want, but over in this area where we're trying to add a new to-do, we may want to have a new to-do container, and that container actually has an icon inside of it. If we select the container can have a name, and the containers are really nice because it allows us to control the width and the margins. And then we can apply a style to the container, and it will apply to everything inside of it. And occasionally we want the container because we want to be able to create a click that when we click on that particular container, anything inside the container, that whole area becomes active instead of just one individual place. So we also have the icon. The icon is inside the container. We could have put in an event to click on the icon itself, but the icon being a little bit smaller, maybe we want it on the container to go ahead and give us more area. The icon itself may have some sort of style associated with it, and it does have a size to go ahead and change just how big those icons are going to look. And then we could wrap that whole thing in a link, and then that link could have some sort of confirmation message to make sure, do we really want to go to the next page. Those links can either be enabled or disabled and visible or invisible. But with the links there will always be some sort of on-click event. So instead of being optional, it's preset, and that on-click event will typically go to a destination so that it makes sense for us to go ahead and link and navigate to that area. When we do those links, there will be some sort of transition. Now, our app has a default transition described for it in each part of the module. So the module has this, and in this case we're just using the default transition that would be available. So we had, a container, an icon, and a link just in one particular area. Across the top we do have a button group, and here you can see the button group is made up of 4 buttons. So the button group can be renamed, and in this case it's priority group, and then we have 4 button group items. So those button group items change between high, medium, low, and all that we can see here. And what happens when we click any one of these, the group will automatically call priority group on change. So we may want a reaction to occur, and in this case, because we're looking at a list, let's filter the list based on the priority. So we would call priority group change, refresh the list, and go ahead and be able to see what's going on. Now inside those button groups there are button group items, and those button group items can be styled differently. So here we chose to change the colors depending on the type of button that we're actually using. So all of that can be customized, which is quite nice. Now below that there's a list, and we can already see that inside of the list there's a list item. So the list will have to have some sort of source data to allow us to go ahead and create the list. And here it says, do we want to animate the list? So if we change the list, add something to it, remove it, will the animation occur so that we can see something has changed? So that's definitely an interesting and good thing. And in this particular case, whenever we create a list, there is a list group style to go ahead and be able to create the list of information that we're looking for. Lists also have an automatic event with them called onScroll. Now we don't have to set up and use the onScroll ending, but if we use onScroll ending, that means that it can load a certain amount of data, and then when it gets to the bottom, it will load more as needed. So that can help us with the performance and overall usability. Now inside those lists, there are individual list items, and here you can see we're sort of implying that this list item can be swiped, and that it would then allow us to either select done or automatically make it done with a fast swipe. So in this case, when we look at the list items, it says, do we want a full swipe left and a full swipe right to go ahead and activate whatever the action might be there. So the list has list items inside of it, and you can see that down below there may be list item actions that are actually going to occur. Also, for this particular list item, if someone just touches it in the main area, what do we want to do on clicking or on touch to actually make that item happen? So we may go to the details, but when we swipe it, we go ahead and complete it and make it finished. So the list item actions will show up, and they have their own area. It's part of the overall swipe. It can have its own style, and it can have its own event. And in this case, on click, we can swipe it open and then touch it, which would be the on click event. But if we have full swipe left or full swipe right set, it would also be able to automatically do that when we swipe across. Now that takes us to inside the list, and inside the list there is a block. So here we've created a little block. This block has the capability of showing the details of a particular to-do. And when we're working on the to-do has this priority. We might be able to change the priority. And it has a star inside of it as well. We might be able to change the star. So when we create a block, we have to be able to define what is going to handle the changes that might occur that could affect the parent. So if our parent list and sorting may need to know that information, we have to be able to provide it. So blocks will often interact with the parent, in this case the list, and it's important to be able to have those changes, have some sort of client action to handle those changes. Now here we can see the block itself with the different types of priorities and the different types of importance as far as whether it's starred or not. So the to-do block itself sort of acts like a normal screen or component that we might be working with. Now inside of this block we're using an expression, and the expression is just getting this particular to-do's title. So we're using the expression as a variable. We were pulling back all of the to-do content, and when we passed in the to-do to this particular block, we put the title in the middle of the to-do. And then there's an if. If this is starred, so if this one is an important to-do, we'll show the activated star, and if not, we'll show the empty star. And when we work with the if tool, the if widget, the first dot will actually show both. The next would only show the true choice or show the false choice. So we have the capability of changing those. And the if needs to know what condition will go ahead and set whether it's true or false. So it's a typical if type of thing, but this is an if that is related to the user interface. So those are some of the basic widgets. We also have a lot of input widgets. And when we talk about input widgets, we would be thinking about having a form. We would then have some sort of input coming into the form, and this would be just regular text type input. We might have multiple lines of text, so we want something a little bit bigger, and we can have a label that might be related to the input. We could have drop downs, checkboxes. The checkbox and the switch are very similar as far as in between two different options. And then if we're getting ready to submit all of the information at once, we may have a button to go ahead and be able to do that. So if you think about setting up some sort of form where we're going to define what a to-do is, we would have a title, a date, some sort of note and text area, whether or not it's complete, what its priority is, and some sort of label to describe what it is. So here we have the Save button. So we have a fairly large form, and that form has lots of containers. Those containers would actually be holding all of the different input widgets. So if we expand that a little bit more, we can see that the title has a label and an input title that would just be regular text. So there's the title widget. We would be using the input widget. Here for the notes, we have a larger text area widget. We have the switch. We have the drop down that has different types of labels, and we're using the button. So as we begin building up these pages, these individual widgets are truly fairly basic building blocks that we will use very often. So it's important to sort of get used to the widgets and feel comfortable with how they're doing what they're doing. So in this session, we talked about what a widget is. We looked at the toolbox and generally how to work with the widgets and find the different widgets and patterns that we need. And then we looked at examples of the basic widgets and the input widgets, but you'll need to spend some time and work with these to get more familiar with them and be able to get them to do what you want them to do. But since they are basic, they're relatively easy to work with. You just drag and drop them and set the parameters.